The content of this video, as well as the thoughts, views, and opinions expressed herein, belong to the presenter and do not necessarily reflect the views of Brigham Young University or the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints.
Now, King Noah is one of the most clearly drawn characters in the Book of Mormon. He's drawn as a great artist would do it by what he does and not by what he says. It's very subtle throughout the Book of Mormon here. The great historian, American historian Freeman, says he can tell you where General Lee was and what he was doing every day between such and such years during the Civil War, but he would never dare to guess what he was thinking. But of course, other types of authors, critics of Joseph Smith, like Fawn Brodie, she can never tell you exactly where Joseph Smith was or what he was doing, but she can always tell you exactly what he was thinking. No, it doesn't work that way. But Noah is a very clearly drawn character, and note how the person behaves. Now we're in the 19th chapter here. The the church. Well, here we go. The Mormon and his people, Alma and his people departed from the waters of Mormon. Hey, we hadn't got to the waters of Mormon, had we? That song at the end. Oh, I shouldn't have left that because that marvelous song. Well, we're jumping ahead. Well, I'm going to go back and talk about that the next time. Because let's talk about King Noah now. And what happens. Alma and his people ran away. They got back to Jerusalem, to Zarahemla, so they weren't able to catch up with them. And now the king, you see, they searched in vain and they didn't find Alma and his people. How is that possible? Well, that happens quite often here. Chief Joseph, they chased him for 3 years all over the United States Army, all over Montana. He didn't quite make it over the border, though, and they finally caught up with him. But other chiefs, Cochise and so forth, David spent a good part of his youth hiding out here and there with little groups of soldiers and retainers. Mosiah, in the rocks he would hide, much description of how he hides in the rocks and on the heights and so forth, escaping notice. So this happens. And they searched in vain and couldn't find him. Now see what had happened. Fortunately, I find some old notes, and they're not bad here, so I'm going to follow them. They're pretty good. What we say here is that the king's forces were not up to the task. See, he loses face. The king's forces were small. They had dwindled, and they weren't able to do the job. And the king has lost face, and already, you see, it's because of his excesses. He has alienated a good part of the people, a small number. The forces of the king were small because there was division among the remainder of the people. See, he's been alienating the people with his excesses. And he also, his wastefulness and extravagance has given rise to this popular unrest, and an opposition party was formed by Gideon. And a little later we find out that it actually bears his name. They're called the men of Gideon. They're referred to a number of times by that name, making it very clear who they were. Yes?
Later in the Book of Mormon it mentions that Gideon has the priesthood.
Yes.
Do you think that Gideon was of an aristocratic family who had the priesthood and was ousted by Noah?
Adam could have given it to him. Well, yes, he had always been hostile, and I say Alma could have given it to him as far as that goes. It's another tradition, it's another party. He'd always been opposed to it. It tells us that he's an old enemy, an old personal enemy of the king, you see. And so what the king does, the lesser part, notice, the lesser part began to breathe out threatenings against the king. Things are getting tough here. And the opposition party is becoming outspoken. Now there was a man among them, the opposition party, see, whose name was Gideon. He was a strong man, an enemy of the king, and he swore in his wrath that he would slay. So this was a personal feud going on. And this was real revolution. If you pronounce that, you're going to slay the king. And he meets him and he chases him to the top of the tower here. Came to pass, he fought with the king, and when the king saw that he was about to overpower him, he fled and ran up and got in the tower which was near the temple. Remember the tower from which you could view the whole land. And moreover, notice it's on a small scale. He chases through the town, he goes up the tower, and Gideon, hot on his heels, and pursues him right to the top. A very dramatic moment here. He casts his eyes towardward, towards the land. This is the 6th verse, you see. Round about toward the land of Shemlon, that means the east. And behold, the army of the Lamanites were within the borders of the land. He could even see that. Now the man objected to my having these dark things in my pocket here. He says it glisters and shines. Like the stars upon the Milky Way, or the leaves in Vallombrosa or something. The third in Normandy, everyone who crossed over, we had these awful coveralls, heavily impregnated with a very powerful chemical. It made your eyes water against gas, you see. And you had to carry a gas mask around your neck, and then you had to carry these big plastic goggles, and they dangled on your bosom, not getting in the way. But the third day, it was a court-martial offense to be found with one of those. It was out of the question, because they were getting us knocked off. They'd give away our position everywhere. They'd glint in the sun, you see. We had these, you think that wouldn't mind in all these woods and so forth. What would a few goggles make? But don't fool yourself. I mean, it was a court-martial offense. It was absolutely deadly to be caught with one of those, with those goggles around your neck, because they would give away positions. Companies, persons, individuals, and everything. A little glitter is all it takes. And this is what happened. If these people were wearing metal, feathers, and the usual crap that they wear in the vase paintings and so forth, you could see them all right from the tower. They glitter all over the place. The least little glint on a barrel, for example, will give away a whole regiment. You know, those things happen. And so he could see them, don't worry. He could see them. Things were stirring on the eastern part of the country, and they were coming in from that side when he got on the high tower. I think always, of course, at Palenque when that comes in. He got on the tower. And then Gideon said, notice, here's a comment on the character of Gideon. He says in the 8th verse, he says, the king wasn't really interested about his people. It was his own life he wanted to save. Nice reflection on the character. You notice Gideon, his great sin is not lechery or luxury. It's his meanness. He's a mean, petty person. He has no feelings for anybody else but a great deal for himself. Characteristic here of people with great power. He said, Gideon, spare me, for the Lamanites are upon us. Uses that as the ruse, you see. It's the enemy of the gates routine. And it was mostly to get him out of the jam. He said this, spare me, for the Lamanites are upon me, and they will destroy us, yea, they will destroy my people. So Gideon gives him the benefit of the doubt. He spares him and lets him go. These interesting human relationships that go on here in the Book of Mormon. And then what does he do? As he says, the king was concerned about his own life, was what really concerned him. He had no appetite for fighting, notice. He's lost his nerve along with the most of the army. He panicked. He says, we'll clear out of town. He ordered a general evacuation, a silly thing to do. It shows again, you see, he's not really a strong character at all. And he does it again. He orders his, remember when they go a little further on, he orders his soldiers with himself to leave the women and children and hightail it, save themselves. And then when he gets out with them, then he flees with just a company of priests to get away from them. This is the kind of man he was, and we're going to see this through here. Nice reflection on King Noah. So he lost his nerve along with most of the army, we said here. And in the Book of Mormon, the actions tell the story, speak for themselves. You see, he ordered a general retreat to the wilderness, an evacuation. This is the reverse of the Rechabites, you'll notice. He goes out with his court, and he goes out with his, especially with the priest, his immediate companies, and they accompany him deeper and deeper into the woods, while he leaves more of the others more and more behind. Now, today is a marvelous day for this. What is the classic retreat to the woods from the royal court? From the court, it's the Duke, in As You Like It. And what happens there? Remember, his brother stirs up a revolution and trouble, a treacherous character, so the good Duke has to flee, and he takes his court with him. And they flee to the forest of Arden. I spent a winter in the forest of Arden, a January and February in the forest of Arden. It was just as cold and just as much snow as we have here, you see. Fortunately, I didn't have to go to Bastogne with the rest of the division. Just as I was warming up the Jeep, came a 4-star order from Paris saying I had to go back there for reassignment. Well, and so I sent right back where I would have been anyway, because they wanted people who spoke French and German to go back. Remember, that was Rundstadt's last throw. They were a throw of the dice, and so they sent a lot of people in false uniforms and dressed up as civilians and so forth behind the lines, and especially they were hiding stuff in caves in the Ardennes. So I visited so many caves in the Ardennes. It was marvelous, because these are the oldest habitations in the world, you know. And in this dead of winter, and then when Patton came up and saved the day, I joined the Third Army. I was attached to the Third Army and was there for the rest of the time, and there and in Luxembourg. But the point is, here we are in the Ardennes, and this is where the Duke is in the Ardennes. And Shakespeare is no fool, you see. He has, the only way you can escape the sophistication and corruption of this thoroughly corrupt court, says the Duke, is to go out into the wilderness. Well, people have that idea, but it's impractical. Well, it was impractical. Notice he doesn't show the Ardennes as it's shown in the usual production of As You Like It, as an existence a la Watteau. everybody's just happy there. The green forest, the green scenery, and and they bring in the deer, and everybody's celebrating. The court is sitting around the fire enjoying themselves. No, none of that. It happens in the dead of winter. And it's a miserable time. They're all, excuse me, standing around shivering, and still got this cold. Standing around shivering, and the Duke, in the opening scene in the forest, the Duke is trying to raise their spirits. He's trying to give them a pep talk. And he says, now my co-mates and brothers in exile, he treats them as his brothers, being very generous with them. Now my co-mates and brothers in exile, hath not old custom made this life more sweet than painted pomp? They left to see the peak of civilization and sophistication and ease, comfort, luxury, and so forth, to live out here in the woods, and it's a terrible, it's midwinter, you see, they shiver around. Then, painted pomp, are not these woods more free from peril than the envious court? It's actually a physical danger. You see, everybody's poisoning and bumping everywhere. Well, look at the trouble he had at court, you see. And remember, Orlando is his brother, has sought his life too. He's a member of the court too, following Duke Frederick, and he's after his brother Orlando's life, and so it goes. It's dangerous. So he says, are not these woods more free of peril than the envious court? Here feel we but the penalty of Adam. This is what he is. The season's difference, which, as the icy fang and chiding, and chiding, what is it? It begins with CH again. And churlish chiding of the winter wind, which even as which as it bites and blows upon my body, even till I shrink with cold, he says, I smile and say, this is no flattery, he says, what you get at court, you say. These counselors feelingly teach me what I am. You see, the Duke, he has no vanity here. He has a right sense of values, but he had to come back to the dank woods. Imagine people have been hunting in those dank woods of the Ardennes. Whether the Boer were still running around then, the GIs used to shoot them, but there they had hunt for, I'd say 15, 20,000 years at the least, in these caves, flushing them out, Well, the reason was, you see, they had been dropping material there, radios and ammunition and explosives and weapons and things like that, and we had to go flush out the caves, and there were people in them and so forth. And but this was the old Ardennes, and then the next lines are, feeling and persuaded what I am, and then we all know the lines that follow. Sweet are the uses of adversity. It's like the toad, ugly and venomous, bears yet a precious jewel in its head. And this our life exempt from public haunts. You've got to get away from the public. Finds tongues in trees, sermons in stones, books in running brooks, and good in everything. I would not change it, he says. He's trying to cheer them up, and that's why Jacques is so downcast and says such cynical things, because everybody's standing around in the royal court. They're having no fun at all, standing in the snow and shivering their heads off. But the king escapes here, and he escapes with his courts, I say, ever deeper into the woods, and it's happened with many others. I say kings do that. There's the Sietch in the Russian, the famous story by Gogol called Taras Bulba. How the people would flee to the Sietch. Those are the big islands in the river, in the Volga and so forth, and there they'd build up their strength and their companies. Oh, then you had the Bagaudi in the early Middle Ages, in the 5th and 6th century. All over France, bands spontaneously to support themselves as the dead of winter would come together, hide out in the woods, and form what strength they could. And by some leader, they'd start out plundering the country. You'd end up building a castle, and you had the Middle Ages upon you before you knew it because of the Gaudi. Well, you have these things happening everywhere. And it happens repeatedly through the Book of Mormon, you see. Lehi leaves Jerusalem because the pressure is too great. And then Nephi leaves his brethren in the New World and goes out by himself. Then Mosiah leaves Nephi's community, after Nephi is dead, of course, and goes out and ends up in Jerusalem. And then Ammon leads Zarahemla, goes out and tries to convert the people. And so we have this process going on all the time. And then finally the saints came west here, didn't they? As George Albert Smith used to say, we came west of our own free will because they made us. You see, we have no choice. We're driven out, like Israel in the wilderness. So it's Das Wandernde Gottesvolk. A famous book was written by Eric Kaseman, called Das Wandernde Gottesvolk, God's wandering people. God's people are always being driven out. They're always wandering because here, as Paul says of Abraham, we are pilgrims and strangers. Here we have no abiding kingdom. Don't look for it. So I smile when I see these books called How to Have a Happy Life, Don't Fool Yourself, or Secrets of Successful Living and all that sort of tribe. we're too strong on that in the church, because this isn't where we're going to have our successful living. This isn't what we're going for at all. It's the eternity. Eternity is a big thing. Well, we go on with our story there now. And so, in the... Yes, the king commanded the people that they should flee before the Lamanites, a foolish thing to do. He himself did go before them and did flee into the wilderness with their women and their children. It came to pass... Well, I fled into the wilderness and hid out more than once on that. Because remember, that was Operation... That was... Well, no, it was just preceded. That was Operation Market Garden, in which we lost our church. We had to run away there. Well, came to pass the Lamanites did pursue them and overtake them and began to slay them, see? Because you can't evacuate a whole people all at once, and catch up with them, and then the king panics again. The king commanded them, his men, that they should leave their wives and children and flee before the Lamanites, still running away. What a king, you see. Now, there were many that wouldn't do it. They wouldn't follow the king. See, he has a ruinous effect wherever he goes. But rather they should stay and perish with them, and the rest left their wives and children and fled, so partly left behind. Those who tarried with their wives and children caused their fair daughters should stand and plead with the Lamanites. Again, this is an ancient custom. Again, we deal with this. Do we have anything about it here? Yes. With the enemies. Those who stayed had their daughters go out to meet the enemy. Well, the story of Lysistrata. The comedy of Aristophanes, how the women end the war. They go out and plead the other side, and the men, who being starved for sex and this sort of thing, they make concessions and they settle. And the story of the rape of the Sabine women, of course, and we have lots of stories of armies being stopped in war, but of course, there used to be a strong, the German anthropologists make a great thing of Brautraub, the robbing of brides. You had to go and steal brides. That was required of you. Outside of a tribe. When you're not supposed to marry within your tribe, you must steal the brides from outside the tribe, and some Indians practice that. And it came to pass, well, the hope is still you don't marry inside your own clan. You must marry outside your clan. This is an important thing, you see, and which is a healthy thing. Came to pass the Lamanites had compassion on them, for they were charmed with the beauty of the women. This is chivalric, you see. The Lamanites always show this, being barbarians and so forth, show this more chivalric attitude than the others, and the rest. So, therefore, the Lamanites spared their lives and took them captives, went back with the women, and that crowd went back, and they consented they deliver up King Noah when they catch him into the hands of the Lamanites and deliver up their property. You can come back and settle again, but you'll be sharecroppers from now on. We'll get 1/2 of your crops, 1/2 your gold, silver, and everything else, and this was the condition on which they went back and suffered, because then we have Limhi. This is where Ammon, remember, found Limhi, expecting they're completely enclosed. Notice this interlacing and all these harking back. It become very complicated how the author keeps this all in order, because there are different plates being used here. Now there was one of the sons king, and there's our friend Limhi. He was the one that Ammon found, or that found Ammon, taken captive, whose name was Limhi. Well, let's see if we got anything here that we're missing any gems here. It's dealing with the enemy, those who stayed behind. Well, that did the trick. They were charmed. And another love-hate issue. A very interesting reflection on character here, you notice here. Limhi was desirous that his father should not be... Now, Limhi was a righteous man, but Noah was his father, so he does the noble thing. He does the right thing, even though Noah was his father, and would threaten to make him unpopular and so forth. Nevertheless, he was not ignorant of his iniquities, he himself being a just man. See, even in such a cesspool, there can be just men, and there are. Never gets that bad. He has feelings, this Limhi does. And he's Noah's son, so we don't judge people. Don't judge people by their parents and relatives. It came to pass that Gideon sent men into the wilderness. This Gideon wasn't going to let up. No, he's a tough character, you know that. He pursues him all the way here. And but Gideon still had it in for the king. He secretly continued searching operation. He caught up with the whole royal force, except the king and his priests, who'd skipped on ahead again. See, he's always leaving his supporters in the lurch if he can get away faster. Came to pass that they met with the people in the wilderness, except the king and the priest. The king and the priest, they were the little knot. They were the the cause of the whole trouble. So when they fled, there was no reason why the people shouldn't go back. So they decided they'd go back again, all the rest of them. But, or would they? They'd sworn, this is what happened. This is why the king had gone on ahead. They'd sworn in their wrath that they would return to the land. So they wanted to go back. They wanted to go back to their wives and children and so forth. They didn't want to be out here with the king, but the king commands them they should not return. 20. They had to stay with him again, you see. With the king, and he caused, and they caused that he should suffer even death by fire. This is the priest that went on with them, you see. The priests were going to go back. See, he went on with the priests, and finally, the last troop that's with him, he still commands them to continue, and this has gone too far. They're going to go back, so they burn the king. This is the normal thing. It's very interesting. Right in front of Mina Lance's house there in Old Arabi, the first house you come to in Old Arabi, you see the 4 holes in the ground there, which are still back from the year, what was it, 1700 they came in? 1768, I think it was 1768, when a new group of priests were imposed on the Hopis by the Spanish, and they ruled very cruelly, and they had one leader, and they enslaved the people actually, but they didn't put up with it for long. And then when they started playing around with the women, that did it, and this was the place where they set up a gibbet and burned them. And they said the 4th thing, but they burned the king, they burned the chief, came to the Spaniards, and they burned the priests. It was the way to get rid of them. So they still have this custom of burning the people they don't like this way. They were tyrannous. See, in 1700 they first came, way back when Cabeza de Vaca came. They always had a rough time with the Spanish, but that was the final solution. After that, they never came back. And so this is what they did. They burned the king, and then they fled along by themselves without the king. And now it came to pass that they wanted to return to Nephi. So after all, once they got rid of the king, everybody wants to go back home again, to the land of Nephi, you see. But is it safe? They'd have to go back under these conditions if they share, because after all what they'd done and so forth. And they went back to the land of Nephi, and on their way back, who should they meet but the men of Gideon? And notice the men of Gideon is definitely a title here. It's referred to 4 times all of a sudden here. The men of Gideon and the men of Gideon. We find in the 24th verse that Gideon wasn't present with them. They weren't called the men of Gideon because they were his company. He was back home, and they called themselves the men of Gideon. So it was a regular party now. When they say, I guess we should capitalize it. They met the men of Gideon, and the men of Gideon told them all that had happened to their wives and their children, and that the Lamanites had granted unto them that they might possess the land by paying the tribute. So they explained the situation back home to them, to the priests. And the people told the men of Gideon that they had slain the king and his priests had fled. So these are the rest of the company that went. The priests went on ahead after they got rid of the king too. So the priests are the ones that are off in the woods by themselves, and they really do some mischief here. And after they'd ended the ceremony, oh, this is a very interesting thing here. What ceremony, you immediately ask. Notice the men of Gideon. We're going to find out about them here. The term men of Gideon is used 3 times in these 2 verses like a title. Gideon's followers, it might be expected, had formed a party around the old reliable fire eater. Gideon was not with them. So they were, we know in the 24th verse, he was not with them, so they were a special party or alliance to bear the name even in his absence, the party of Gideon here. He'd been going right from the beginning too. And then the 24th verse, and after that they ended the ceremony. They all headed for home together. Now, what ceremony? Well, it was very clear. Remember, these people had left the town. Gideon had come to catch up with them and punish their leader. Gideon couldn't leave Noah alone. He was on his heels all the time. So they were hostile parties. They were opposed to each other. One was the refugees, and the other were the avenging party following them. So they're hostile. They can't settle and go back home together until they have settled and smoked the peace pipe and had the ceremony. You have to have a ceremony before you can reach peace with a hostile group. Either fight them or have the ceremony. So that's what they did. They had a peace ceremony. They always have that. But this is put in here so casually, as if Joseph Smith knew exactly what he was saying. And it came to pass that, after they had ended the ceremony, so they carried out certain rites of reconciliation here, which is very common. It has to be done as far as that goes. Unthinkable to omit it then. And they went back and told Gideon himself all what they told the men of Gideon about the king, his old rival. And then Limhi and the Lamanite king both agreed, he's come back now, and swore to the treaty. See, Limhi hadn't left, they'd been out to get Gideon's people. swore to the treaty under which the Nephites would settle down as wards of the Lamanites, completely surrounded by them. This is the condition that Ammon finds them in, you see. And the treaty was respected on both sides for 2 years, in the 29th verse here. But it has the seeds of conflict in it here. Incidentally, I should have noted at the beginning of this chapter here, yes. Remember, we had the description in the other 2 chapters. Before that, we had the Doctrine 15 and 16, the doctrinal chapters of Abinadi. Then the next one, 17, 18, describe Alma's community in the wilderness by the waters of Mormon as an idyllic setting. There's an existent Salawato, there's the forest of Arden, you see. And but these chapters, now from 19 on, these are the most important of all. These are the most enlightening of all. They tell us, this is where we, after the description of the church, the subject here is how to deal with your enemies. That's what the following chapters are, and it's very important here. Many interesting test cases are presented here for our profit and learning. How to deal with your enemies. We see they're dealing with enemies here. Notice this settlement we've just had. They made their peace. They made their peace. After they'd finished the ceremony, they were all ready to go back home and be happy together. But they're still dealing with them now. Limhi is under very close guard by the Laman, the Lamanite king, because they make this. But you notice in the 28th verse, he's had experience. The Lamanite king is taking no chances. He sends out team to ensure compliance, inspection teams. Notice here, and the king of the Lamanites set guards round about. He's going to watch to make sure they keep the treaty. They've made the treaty now. Various ways of dealing with enemies, various degrees. Now it breaks in the next chapter into a real Cold War. You see, 2 years is all they can take of this. The pressure's too great on them. After he made the oath and they pay the tribute of 1/2, he set guards round about that they might keep the people of Limhi in the land, that they might not depart into the wilderness. We're going to keep them here. That's it. They've been fooled too many times. This departing into the wilderness has been routine. I just wanted to go to school, of course. And he did support his guards out of the tribute which they paid. So the tributes they paid went to support the guards that watched over them. A very normal operation. You got to pay for them somehow. All right, the Nephites, we collect half their crops, and this pays for the guards. They didn't like this continual peace for the space of 2 years. The Lamanites didn't molest them. It was profitable to them, but it wasn't very pleasant for the Nephites. So what are they going to do? More dealing with your enemies, the 20th chapter. Now these are the Locrian maidens, or what will you? There was a place in Shemlon where the daughters of the Lamanites did gather themselves together to sing and dance and make themselves merry. Now this reminds us of all sorts of things. And notice, sing and dance, there was a particular place to sing and dance and make themselves merry. At the end of the year, after all the formal dances have taken place, then the girls among the Hopis have 3 dances. They have the Lacon and the Marawu and the very difficult one to pronounce, the Wakult. And these are fun dances. They're for relaxation more than anything, but they still are very ritual. They're very ritually conditioned. And but they go out to the desert alone by themselves to celebrate. They go to a big black rock that has a lot of bumps in it. These bumps are supposed to have significance. And the most important thing, before each of these 3 dances, the Lacon and the Marawu are the most important, but the Owelka is the basket dance that comes at the end. In each of these 3 dances, the preceding rites are the most important. They divide into 4 groups under 4 maidens. Each one has a different color, and they represent different directions. They have competitions, they run races among them and things like that before they settle these things. All the rites and ordinances have to do with 2 things here. Even I say it's just for play. This is fun. This is not, the whole tribe doesn't enter into this. As it says here, the girls go out to make themselves merry to a particular place. That's exactly what they do. And the reason I'm emphasizing this is we're going to have exactly the same thing in the old world, and our ancestors doing exactly the same thing in England. If you go through the 4 volumes of Grimm, which I'm the proud possessor, I got the whole thing for $4. That was many years ago. You'll find hundreds of instances of it happening on the continent. Right in the 19th century this happens. I mean, these are very ancient rites, and they're universal, and we get that very interesting problem of why they should be universal, why they're so much alike. Well, we continue anyway with the basket dance. But what they do, the first dance, in the Lacon, they make a big cloud pattern on the ground with meal, and then they throw little corn images at it, wrapped in corn husks. They try to hit it, and this represents both rain coming from the clouds and the wind. They get things going, you know. And in all of them, they scatter things. They all have sparsionis. They all scatter things. The basket dance, because they give away baskets free. But in between it, the marawu, it's food. Everything has to do with rain, weather, and food, you see. And, of course, you see how they stick. If you live on the sand and have nothing, you depend on the rain. Remember, there's not a running stream in the whole reservation. They depend on the rain, and they say that's a blessing that God sent them there, because they must always depend on Him. They'll never be sure. Their own, no matter how they work, no matter how hard they work, no what they do, they cannot guarantee success in this world. Don't think that hard work will do it. It won't. No people work as hard as the hope is. In some years, the stuff just won't grow. But if they do these things, the things will grow. Well, now, we have the same thing. This is a very important thing. They timed them by the Pleiades, the rising of the Pleiades, and they take place at dawn, these rites at dawn. That's very important. They have these contents done by the Pleiades. Because now we go to the oldest Greek songs we have, Alcman's poems. I might as well write some of these names on the board. Alcman, the Lacon, that's the dance, usually spelled with a K. The Lacon is the big dance, and the Marawu, the maiden's dance. And but Alcman, a very early poet writing in Sparta, before the days that Sparta degenerated into a military state. This is a very old thing, Alcman. And his maiden songs. The maiden songs, they still survive. And they're divided into two companies. The girls are divided into two companies. They have a foot race at dawn. One group is called the Pleiades, or the Doves, and the other Pleiades, because of the Pleiades, but Aeschylus, there's a passage in Exodus where he says they are also the Pleiades, which means the doves, and they have a foot race at dawn in order to elect the queen. They have a beauty contest. We have the beauty contest. They form in antiphonals on either side and sing to each other. There has to be 12 on either side, and I notice here there were 24 maidens. It says specifically there were 24 maidens when they caught them out by themselves here. Well, because they also have to time themselves by the moon. As you know, the women always follow the moon, and there are 12 months in the year, and this is once a year. They hold this for the year right. This is at the end of the year. This is right at the end when they have to guarantee food and succession for the new year. The same thing whether in the Hopis or the Greeks makes no difference, way back there. That one. So they have this beauty contest. One side says, Hadjasikar's hair is as spun gold, and the other says, yeah, I am black but comely, because you get the very same things in the Psalms of Solomon. In Solomon's love song, I think of the Greek name for it, but they have the contest. Remember, he says, "I am black but comely," and they're competing for the hand of the king here for David. And well, they say David has slain his thousands, but Saul has tens of thousands. They're having a contest too. Well, these contests are very ancient anyway. But here they are competing to choose the queen for the year, while the big rites are to be held later, and. They do the same thing, and they have to do with the sowing, and it has to do with the weather and all that sort of thing, and they sing these songs. And then come back to Shakespeare. This is one I like too. Remember what Titania says. This takes us way back to the early days, but these things were still being practiced. Hector St. John Feasy wrote a very good book on English Easter ceremonies, because Easter is much older than Christianity in England, these things. Remember, Titania says, and never since the winter, summer, spring, as he says, yes, he's talking about the equinox and the solstice. And never since the winter, summer, spring, met we on hill and dale, forest or mead, or by the fountains, yes, or by paved fountain, or by rushy brook, or on the beached margin to the sea. The women go out here, you see, to dance our ringlets to the whistling winds. I just had looking at some photographs last hour of the cone dance here, and there are always 12, they're always in a ring, and they're always the 12, and the baskets, they throw away the baskets with the food on them. You see, the whole thing, this all has to do with food. But they dance their ringlets to the wind, but with thy brawls thou hast disturbed our sport. See, they're out there to disport themselves, and the men have come and bothered it. It says, therefore, the winds piping to us in vain, as if in vengeance, have sucked up from the sea contagious fogs, which falling on the land made every pelting river so proud that they have overborne their continents. The ox has therefore stretched his yoke in vain. They're not getting any crops because they've stopped the rites, you see. The ox is therefore stretched his yoke in vain. The farmer lost his sweat. And the green corn has rotted ere its youth attained a beard. See, the crops are rotten. Nothing happens if they don't do these things right. These are corn maidens. They call themselves the corn maidens, and it's the dance, the whole thing. Ere its youth, so the corn has rotted. The fold stands empty in the drowned fields. The field is drowned. There are no crops and there are no flocks anymore. And crows are fattened on the murrain flock. They've got disease, murrain of the flocks, and the crows are fattening on it. Now this is a very important thing, because this refers to the very oldest rites in the world. This goes right back to Paleolithic times. You find these designs on cave walls everywhere. It's the Troy game, and I made quite a study of it once because the Romans made a big thing of it. It's very old. They took it back to Troy and so forth. And that's these designs with the maze, you know. And so he says, she says, the nine man's Morris is filled up with mud. That's where the men dance, the ring dance. It's the Mars dance. Morris is Mars, the same thing. It's very old, and the nine men's Morris is filled up with mud. In the north, you see, they don't have the seven. It's nine they emphasize, and they dance these ring dance. And the quaint mazes in the village green for lack of tread are indistinguishable. They've grown over. They're not using the mazes anymore, which they should use. The maze, you see, you get back to the center of the underworld, and then you emerge again. The sun emerges again, and you emerge again, and it's a resurrection is what the maze signifies. It's very, very common, a universal rite throughout the world. And the quaint mazes in the village green for lack of tread are indistinguishable. The human mortals lack their winter cheer, or winter here, either word, we don't know which it is. No night is now with hymn or carol blessed. See, hymns and carols belong to the Christmas season, the turn of the year, see, and to the Easter time. These solar festivals, the whole thing being to assure the crops. It's not the sun there, it's not the water thereafter. They get too much water, these people in England here. The Hopis have to have more water and less sun. These people have to get less sun and more water, more sun and less water, and this is what's worrying them. Is now, therefore, the moon, the governess of floods, pale in her anger, washes all the air. Those magnificent lines, you see. Therefore, the moon, the governess of floods. See, this is all the woman's rights. Pale in her anger, washes all the air, that rheumatic diseases do abound. The human race is afflicted now. Everything is sick. Nothing is working here. The seasons alter, he says. Spring, summer, chiding autumn, angry winter, changed unwonted liveries. And the mazed world knows not which is which. Before the seasons alter, it says, oh yes, the season. It shows everything is cockeyed now. It says, hoary-headed frosts fall in the lap of in the fresh lap of the crimson rose. I mean, when it should be spring, we get frost. And on old Hiam's chin an icy crown, midwinter, when it should be winter, an odorous chaplet of sweet summer buds is as in mockery placed. Early spring, everything blossoms out. This is what's happened in the east, you see, this year. Everything was 70 and 80 degrees a week or so ago back there. Now all of a sudden, whammo, this is what hits them. See, the seasons alter. And we shouldn't be having these summer buds in the middle of winter, she says. And this progeny of evil comes of us. This is what brings it out. When men quarrel, when they do not cooperate, when there's fight between them, this is what happens. And this progeny of evil comes of us, of our debate, of our dissension. We are its parent and original. We started all these things. Now, it's the same thing. And so, the last verse of the Bible, just before you get to Malachi of the Old Testament, they're told the very same thing. I mean, these rites are very common among the Jews. And it says here, I just wrote it down from Zechariah this morning. And it shall come to pass that everyone who is left out of all the nations shall surely go up from year to year to worship the King, the Lord of hosts, Sabbat. You see, Sabbat means the gathering of the people. It doesn't mean a military host. It means the general assembly of everybody. The Lord of hosts, Adon Sabbat, to keep the feasts of the tabernacles. See, when they came there, it's a natural feast. It has to be in the desert. Remember, the tabernacle is a temporary tent thrown together of green boughs or anything you can get. And it tells us its purpose is to shelter you from the sun in the daytime and the rain and the weather and so forth, because you're out in the open. Thou shalt not celebrate the Passover within thy gates. See? You have to come as a pilgrim and you have to live outside. And this is in the desert. Remember, Moses asked Pharaoh, he says, we must go out into the desert. We cannot celebrate the Passover at home. We must go out in the desert to celebrate it there. And Pharaoh didn't want to let him go. And then they had to go. But that's why he said, Kizeh Hadalanoi, because this is the festival of the Lord. We have to go out in the desert to do it. And so we're having the same thing here. It's the Feast of the Tabernacle, and everybody has to come. And what happens if you don't come, it says? Then he says, for whosoever will not come up of all the families of the earth to Jerusalem to worship the King, the Lord of hosts, even upon them shall be no rain. They shall be plagued with the horses, the mules, the camels, the asses, of all the beasts of the field. They shall be in these tents. They shall be plagued. If you don't come to do this, you'll not get any rain. So they were doing the same things as our ancestors were doing in England quite recently, and as the Hopis do today, and as these maidens are doing here. It's the very same thing. Now, what is the rationale of this? These things are much too close together to be accidental. I mean, the same number of maidens doing the same number of things, having the same types of songs and so forth. I would say the purpose is this, yes. Well, it's to keep the people acting together in one purpose with one mind. So you get a community. Remember, these people are struggling for existence. Back to the Hopis again. They live on the margin of nothing but dry sand to live on. They've kept going. This is what's kept them going. Everybody's tried to undermine it, and they've still kept going. Dance the whole year. The only people in the world that still do this, exactly as it should be done from the beginning of it. What a cost, because they're the poorest people on earth. Well, anyway, it focuses their minds on these things, on dependence on the Creator. Say, we have no streams that we can, no irrigation, nothing like that. We push the corn in the sand and hope it'll grow, and that's all that we have to pray God about it. And they always talk about God the Creator. They don't talk about the gods or the demons, or they don't have anything like that. It is the Lord. We find this later on in the Book of Mormon. When Ammon is preaching, he says to the king, do you believe in the Great Spirit? He says, yes, we believe in the Great Spirit. And Ammon says, well, that's God, the same God we believe in, see? So don't think we're dealing with wild pagans here. But this is very necessary, see? It keeps a common interest in survival. It's to plan and complete common enterprises that have to be done. It's to give beauty and variety to the scene, to banish boredom and monotony what would otherwise be a very dull existence. But remember, as the Duke says, this is much more interesting than life in the painted pomp and the dangerous jealousy of the court. If you have the choice between them, this is pretty hard, he says, but I would not change it, he says. I would not change this life. See, his people all want to go back, of course, just as they do here. They want to go back where it's easier. So it does that too. And it bars this boredom, as I say, and monotony, because it's always interesting, all exciting, always fun, from a completely stable and reliable way of life. Now that would be repetitious, it would be dull, unless you're expanding, unless you're acquisitive, unless the stock market is going up, we panic. You see, no, you can't go on doing that forever. But how can these people stand it out there, living life like that? Well, I love to go down just to enjoy myself. Everybody enjoys themselves at these dances. That's why they don't miss them. You think old people that have seen them hundreds of times and so forth, they wouldn't bother to go. Oh no, nobody ever misses them, regardless of the weather. And so we have it. So then, these girls are out there, and the discredited priests of Noah are afraid to go home, and they watch a small company of the girls. Remember what happened to him. What's his name? If you watch these companies, you see the thing is this. You know his name. If a man watches these rites and so forth, then he's struck blind, or, well, a very famous case in Egypt, where he's struck blind for doing this very thing. Or he's struck dead or something like that, like Actaeon. He was the name I was trying to think of, Actaeon. He saw Diana and her maidens. Of course, it was Artemis and her maidens now. For that, he was out hunting and accidentally blundered on the place in the woods where the maiden was dancing. So she turned his own dogs against him, and they tore him to pieces, because you're not supposed to be there, you see. But these priests are also not to be snooping there. But you know what they have in mind. And they watched them, the daughters of the Lamanites. When they were but a few gathered together, it says there were 24 of them, which is very interesting, because I see there you have your double round, your antiphonal, 12 on each side. They have to have a contest, you see, and one girl for each month of the year, for each moon. They're the moon maidens, All these things go together in a very interesting way. The 24 daughters of the Lamanites, and they were carried, snatched them and carried them away into the wilderness. This is plundering. What's his name? The anthropologist at Berkeley. Well, it used to be a common thing. They used to teach that the bridal veil came from that. You had to capture a bride, so you went and threw a net over her, and that was the bridal veil, was the net you threw over to catch her. Came to pass the Lamanites. Well, when they found out about the daughters were missing, they didn't come home. As they go out to dance by themselves, they thought naturally it was the people of Limhi that were out there, that had fled out there from the town. They hadn't all come back, and they had done this. Now we have a very interesting business on how to deal with a very touchy, very dangerous situation, you see. Notice how well the thing is handled here, how well the leaders handle it, Limhi and the Lamanite king between them. Here's what happens. Now Limhi had discovered from the tower even all their preparations for war. He did discover, those are the glistening goggles I was talking about, you know. I mean, if that dark thing disturbs the peace of our celebration here, you can see what all this shining metal would do in the woods. Discovered them from the tower, even all their preparations for war he did discover. Therefore he gathered his people together and laid wait for them in the forest. So that's what the terrain is. He's going to catch them from their waiting places. The battle became exceeding sore, and they won. They fought like dragons. That's a very interesting thing that it uses the word dragons here. There's this surprising ferocity. You wouldn't think dragons, a concept from the old world, would be found among these people, but it is. They're the one-horn and the two-horn societies, get themselves up as savagely as possible, and you know, in Central America, this is common. The warrior phratries, every one of them, had monsters for their emblems, and they wore the masks. You see this on the vase paintings and the murals and so forth, and they wore these monster masks for emblems, and nothing more popular, of course, than the snake with the horns and all the rest, the dragons. And other monsters appear there. So when it says they fought like dragons, the Lamanites must have been pretty spectacularly gotten up. They do these things. Later on, they even more so. They did a great deal of slaughter with their warrior casques, and it came to pass they found the king of the Lamanites among the number of the dead. They thought that he was only wounded. They carried him away, bound up his wounds, and brought him before Limhi. Well, that was the right thing to do, of course. And then, what happens? They brought him for execution. Let's slay him. But notice Limhi, as I said, is a very sensible person. He is tolerant of his own father's, because there's nothing much he can do about it, just being that kind of a person. His father's going to go on doing it. But he does what he thinks is right. He was a righteous man. And here again, they all come, hooray, hooray, we've won, let's put the king to death, which is the thing you do. That's what shachmach is, you see. That is, the king is dead. Mach is dead, of course. Mat, in all Semitic language, in Egyptian especially, mat means dead. The shachmach means the king is dead when you win the game, you see. And this is shachmach, we've won the game, let's kill the king. Lamani says, no, you shall not slay him, but bring him hither, that I may see him. And they said, and then he questioned him, why did you come up against us? What have you got against us? That's the thing to answer. What are you fighting for anyway? We haven't broken the oath that I made, but they thought they had broken the oath, you see. We haven't broken the oath. Why should you break the oath which you made to my people? You broke your oath, we didn't break ours, the usual charges. The king said, no, I have broken my oath because your people carried away the daughters of my people. Therefore in my anger I did cause my people to come up to war against them. When Limhi had heard nothing concerning this. He didn't know anything about this breaking of oath because it's the priests that had done it, not his people. So he says, I'll search and find out, and whoever did this will pay the price. I'll launch a thorough investigation, he says in the 16th verse here. It's not the usual reaction would be boys will be boys. And lots of atrocities, and we just say boys will be boys. But he's going to see that this is done. Could I a tale unfold here? And if it was done on our side, it was all right, you see. They were terrible, worse than the Germans did. But it was all right. And now then, Gideon had heard these things. He was over listening, being the king's captain. He was there. They had brought the captive king up here. Naturally, the chief military man has to be present for consultation. Gideon says, hey, we know who did that, remember? Don't search this people. Go out, look for the priests of thy father. Now there's a very interesting rhetorical device used here. Very interesting. It tells us what the word is here. In Arabic, for example, in Hebrew less, but in Arabic all the time, you cannot begin a sentence cold. You just can't say, he went into the house, or there was a house on the hill. You have to begin with inna, behold. behold, this happened. But it's a nominal sense or a verbal sense. You begin with inna or hinna or behold or it is so. And it's so, but in urgent cases, what the Greeks call epiopteroenta, you have to introduce what you're saying by an excitement word. And in Egyptian, you have to use it before every sentence. In this case, it would be yis or mes. It would be a yis or a mes. Yis, yis, yis. And you notice the way he builds up here, the way it's translated here as behold. He says, now, this is it, you see. The priests of thy fathers, he gets more excited about it. Are not they the ones who have stolen the daughters of the Lamanites? And now behold and tell the king, you know, he put that in, behold and tell. It's redundant, but notice 3 times in this sentence. Now behold and tell the king these things, he may tell the people that they may be pacified. For behold, they are already preparing to come. For behold also, there are few of us. And behold, they come with their numerous hosts. He builds up the climax and excitement. He says, we've got to act quickly here. And, you know, it's just like it came to his mind like a flash. We know who it was now. So he used this series of beholds, which are very Semitic, very eloquent, and very necessary, as anybody could see that. Joseph Smith knew this very well, of course. So he says, are they not the ones? Now behold and tell the king these things, that he may tell his people. They may be pacified to us. For behold, they are already preparing to come against us. Behold also, there are but few of us. And behold, they come with their numerous hosts. We've got to do something. For not the words of Abinadi fulfilled, which he prophesied against us and all this people, because we would not hearken. All this trouble has been brought. And this dissension comes of us, from our debate, and all this progeny of evil comes of us, from our debate, from our dissension. It always comes back to our own guilt. And so here we are, come full circle here. And now we notice the qualities here, but I see the time is up now, and we have to break it up and go out into the snow. But the Book of Mormon I find quite convincing. I don't know, somebody did an awfully good job on it. But of course you can't stay to listen to this. I mean, people, the usual thing, as you know, with critics of the Book of Mormon, they ask a perfectly logical or reasonable question, I say about horses or something, and then they leave the room. They won't wait for an answer. I mean, if they were honest about asking the question, they would take every method, use every means they could to answer the question. See, well, what's the answer here? They don't. They say they've asked the question. We know they came by Alaska. They came by the north side. That's the only place they ever think of as far as that goes. Erdős spent all his life trying to prove it and failed. But, of course, they came that way. The Hopis call that the back door. Many people come by the back door. They say, but it's not the way the Lord sent them. There are other people. It talks about the Navajos came in the 8th century by the back door, speaking another language, Athabascan, a different people. They overran the Hopis, and there have been very, very great pressures on them ever since. But they come by the back door. There's no reason why that's the only way people have to come, or that there are plenty of Mongols among them, Mongolian types, of course, but they're by no means the only type. We have the best collection of Indian portraits in the world right here. Must be worth millions of dollars. We used to have them in all the halls, and they started getting stolen, so nobody's had to look at them for years and years. And that's too bad, because you should see those portraits. They're marvelous. You see every physical type you can imagine there. We may mention that when we talk about race later on, because the Book of Mormon is going to tell us a lot about that. Well, now, what did we say the extra reading was? Book of Mormon. It's nice to be provided with a handbook and a syllabus and something that has all the answers in it and under one cover. It's just a marvelous book to have. All this editing and so forth. We ask, why do they put this part? This isn't doctrine. What's it doing in here? It is doctrine. It tells us how to get along with each other, which we need today.
Why do you think that Limhi became king after his father was disposed instead of Gideon seizing power?
He didn't seize power. It was the Lamanites that made him king. They put him in.
Oh.
Yeah, the Lamanites trusted him. He was a man you could trust. He was reliable. And he was agreed. Notice he had this agreement all along with the Lamanite king. That's why he was in. And Gideon was a fire eater. He was chasing around anyway. He was too busy getting rid of Noah.
So you're saying that if the Lamanite king really hadn't have put Limhi in charge, Gideon might have become king, seized power, do you think?
If he'd seized power, he was a revolutionary. Yeah. He already chased the king out with a sword. That shows him not necessarily ambitious, but he had a thing for Noah. one of these classic feuds. Yeah. Why? Well, this can help.
No. Just on the inside. Thank you.
There. That's a very interesting thing. I'm going to mention that today. In the Book of Mormon, that's a very direct bearing on the lesson for today. Putting your sunglasses in the inside pocket. I don't kid you. It's true. We shall see what we shall see here. You see. You'd be surprised. Let me see. Let's do with this stuff.